tonight, what we're going to do is we're going to turn a live edge bowl. So we're going to have a real quick discussion about what wood to use, and when to cut the wood and why. And then we're going to get into the bowl. So I've got some sour wood that I got from Victor Todd. This was cut in the late fall, um, or winter, and you can see that the bark is adhered very tight to the wood. Even on the side that split a little bit, the bark is still nice and close. If you cut in the spring or summer when the water's coming back up into the log, you get this. And that just comes right off. So when the tree was cut is very important if you want to work with live edge pieces that include the bark. Live edge, I like Phil Anderson's discussion about live edge versus uh, natural edge. Live edge, Phil says, means that the bark's there just like when the tree was alive. Natural edge means the bark didn't stay, but you've got the actual edge of the log underneath it. Um, so furniture makers call what we call a natural edge piece a live edge, but they have to take the bark off. Our intent is to keep the bark on. One thing I learned from Bart Connors is drill a hole for your center and start between centers. And there's two reasons why. First of all, if you drill down a little bit bigger than your drive center, um, and about a 3/8 of an inch deep at least, if something happens and it comes loose, it's going to catch the wood because the center's down inside of it, so it's not going to fly off the lathe. Now, I have actual center marked and it's balanced pretty well. But another reason to drill that hole is because depending as we start to round this, depending on how it looks, you can see that the log was a little bit odd shaped. This was where the pith was. I have the other half minus pith right here. So you can see it was kind of an oblong or almost an egg shape, really. Um, and it just was a little bit of a different shape. Actually, it goes this way. It was just a little bit of a different shape, because the pith was off center. So I'm not going to be able to get a dead center grain cross necessarily unless I change where I put my marked center. So I marked from corner to corner, then I marked mathematically. Um, and mathematically, this is center. From corner to corner, this is center. That's a little bit of the pith that had a little bow in it, even though this was a very straight little section. You can see the grain is pretty straight. Um, so what I may end up doing is moving my center over here to where the pith is once I get the corners knocked down. So if I have that drilled first so that the drive center fits down in it, I can move that a lot more safely without it wanting to just kind of sneak out or grind out. The teeth of the drive center can actually just grind away the bark and it can start sliding. So it's just a safer way to hold it if you drill a hole there first, and it gives you a little bit more security once you get that locked in between centers. And we will go ahead and back this up a little bit. And we'll start rounding. I don't like to round when I'm doing a live edge piece. I do not like to round it on the bandsaw. There's just more chance. The more I treat this before I put it on the lathe, there's more chance that I knock the bark loose. So I prefer to turn that round, and we may end up, depending on how the bark, I think this bark's going to hold pretty well. If the bark starts slipping, we might cut backwards. We might cut from bark side towards the center rather than cutting from the center out. That's another thing to think about when you're doing a live edge piece is will the will turning it peel the bark or not. This is pretty well adhered, so I think we have a very good chance of it staying on. And that's actually spinning on that live center. All right, so we want to just knock the corners off and check. Bark's holding. That's a good sign. Once we can start getting a feel for that, we can move a little bit more wood. So the reason you want the tree to be cut down in the fall or winter is because the sap drops down out of the main body of the tree. The tree is not actively growing. That's where we get growth rings in the spring. The sap rises up into the tree, and the bark actually starts to get looser to make room so that the tree can grow another ring. So it's important to know when the tree was felled if you want to do a live edge piece. At least out here on the East Coast. I can't speak for mesquite. That stuff's dry all the time.
It follows the same principle.
Does it? Okay.
Yeah.
All right. We're getting a little tiny bit of torn grain on this edge, but I believe the reason that's happening is because of that weird shape of the log, and we're actually, if you look at the way the rings are, here we're coming cross grain into this. So here's the rings, and we're kind of coming cross grain, but here we're starting to actually come back at the same direction of the grain. And I can also start to look and see where the center is and try to feel for where I want to put that. Now that I've got it a little bit closer to round and a little bit of the bulk off of the corners, I think we are going to change our center just a little bit and see if we can't, so we get that nice X in the bottom of the bowl. So that seems like it's not a lot. I only moved it over a quarter of an inch, but that's actually pretty radical. So slow your lathe down because it's not going to balance. And get it back. We've got a little bit of a shimmy. And that's about all we're going to get out of it right there until we even it out again. You take steps. You feel like you're taking too big of bites. Step back a little bit. We're really not moving very fast yet. See if we can get that bottom a little closer to level. There we go. A bit of a draw cut there. So you can see the two different planes. There's where we started. This is where we've ended up. I think I'm going to like that better. Once you get it back into balance, you can speed it up a little, but patience is really the key right at this stage. I'm going to stop and take a look again. And repositioning it is actually getting us better cuts here. We still got a little torn grain, but we'll deal with that. Um, we'll deal with that as soon as we get this to true round. We're going to move a little bit faster. I think I do like that better, and we're going to get very close to having the center where it crosses grains dead center. We'll be we'll be very close. If we can get past that wobble, there we go.
This is a very interesting wood. It's quite dense. Never turned it before. It smells like green apples.
Yeah, imagine that.
And this is a
What
pretty
kind of
dry
wood?
piece. It's not very, it's, I wouldn't say fully dry, but it's definitely not green.
What kind of wood is it again?
Say again?
What kind of wood is it again?
Sourwood. Sourwood.
Sour wood. Huh.
I'd honestly never heard of it until Victor gave me this chunk. I might have to go back and steal more from him. All right, now we're taking a little bit bigger bites out here at the edge just to try to get this up. We have this crack here, and we have what looks to be a little bit of ring shake. I don't know that that's, I think we turned most of that away. That might have been more of a radiant crack, and we turned most of it away. So we're going to keep an eye on those, but I honestly believe by the time this is fully round, this crack will be almost gone. This one will probably be gone. We'll deal with that once we get this closer to fully round. To
Yeah,
that
that
end,
bark
we're going
looks
to,
like sassafras.
it does a little. This is
Yeah.
definitely not sassafras.
Right. Yeah, yeah, for sure. Yeah. It doesn't smell like apples, that's for sure.
Yeah. Again, as you're rounding, if you feel like you're getting a little bit too deep, a little bit too thick of a cut, just take a step. And out here where I'm turning mostly air, that cut will a lot of times just naturally get a little bit deeper, but you're turning mostly air, so it doesn't have the same effect as if you're trying to really dig in through solid wood. We'll work with this. All right, we're almost completely round. A little flat spot here and a little flat spot there. We can start to shape this a little bit more. And that crack has reduced quite a bit, but it's still there. Well, let's level off this base. Almost level. Now we start to work on the shape of this little bowl.
Let's take a look at what we did. All right, we still seeing that crack. That one's almost gone. So that was not ring shake. But I still want a narrower base, and I'm still not quite flat and even on the bottom. We definitely want to have a flat base here so that we know where the shape of the bowl is going to end. All right, a tiny bit convex. Okay, now we've got a nice even base. Let's look at the live edge now. Now, what we've created by moving the center is a low side and a high side. So the decision needs to be made. Do I want those sides even? That would look like this. But what that sacrifices is the grain in the center of the bowl. Personally, I'm not opposed to a low side and a high side. It gives, in my opinion, it gives the piece a front. If you're looking at it, this would be the front of the piece and the back, and it gives a piece direction. It gives it flow.
That's
I'm
what I
okay with
like.
that. Yeah,
That's
I'm
what I
okay with
like.
that. I that's personal. That is personal preference, but I think that that actually makes a piece speak a little bit more if it
Right.
kind of has a direction to it. So we're going to keep it that way. But again, we're dealing with some cracks here, some of those radiant cracks. Um, you can see they're getting less. Let's get this round, and then we'll make a decision as to whether we want to make the base narrower and see if we can turn that away, if we're going to live with that and maybe celebrate that little feature. We're pretty well in balance now. Still a little bit out because it's not a even round blank. But we can at least get up a little bit more speed so that we have cleaner cuts. Certainly not going to the races. We've got a little, is that loose bark? Just a little tiny bit of loose bark. But our torn grain problem is not much of a problem, except on these cracks. So there's two ways we can fix that. The first is with the 80 grit bowl gouge, or we can come back to about this far down the piece of wood from the wrong direction. We're going to try that. And the way to pick that cut up is rub the bevel, come back, rubbing the bevel until you're clear, and then turn that gouge in slightly and pick up that cut. You have to watch the shadow. You cannot look at the tool and see that cut. You have got to watch the shadow. What I mean is you have to watch the backside of the bowl
If you look at your tool, you're never going to get a clean cut. You have to watch the backside of the bowl. You can do a little shear scraping. Stop the lathe and look. And that did, in fact, clean that up quite a bit. And that's probably all the further we want to go with that particular cut. We have a little bit of a tool mark here. We'll shear scrape that. Just close the flute, use the bottom wing, essentially becomes a negative rake scraper. And again, watch the shadow. Look at what you're creating, not where it's cutting. All you see if you look at what it's cutting is flashing light and sawdust. Clean that up pretty nice. Now we can come back and meet that from this side. I would say that this grain is denser than cherry. Pretty nice. All right, we got to blend that little angle right there just a touch. We'll come back and do a little bit more negative rake scraping or shear scraping. And we should blend that nicely. The stuff cuts really nice. I might have to come visit you and steal some more, Victor.
He said you could have as much as you wanted, JJ.
I got a buddy who has a trailer I can borrow. Just saying. Actually, quite pleasurable to cut this wood. It's really nice. All right. Not bad, not bad. A little bit of torn grain. Hush you. A little bit of torn grain. Hey, that's my puppy. A little bit of torn grain, but not bad. Now, we could play with shape all night long and have a long discussion about that. But I want to get to hollowing and wall thickness because that's the other part of a live edge bowl that makes a big difference when you see the end product. So a little trick I also learned from Phil Anderson of the Shady Acres Wood Shop is if you set your pencil on top of your 60-degree live center and draw a circle. If you're using a Novichok with 60 millimeter jaws, or is it 70 millimeter jaws? 70, I think. That's going to get you just outside the circumference of your tenon. So you get just a little smaller than that. Basically, once you turn that away, you will fit your tenon. On a bowl like this, I prefer, well, first of all, there's no way to hold it to turn a recess because we're between centers. But I also prefer a tenon so that when I finish the bowl, there's not a lot of way to figure out how I held the bowl. It just gives it a little bit more mystery. So we just turned that away, and now we will create a dovetail with a little 3/8 inch spindle gouge. If you've watched Mark Soleil turn, you're probably familiar with that spindle gouge shape, and it cuts a great dovetail. And then I want to get a little bit more of this out of the way so that I make sure it fits down in the middle of the chuck. But I want to keep my center. When we finish the bottom of the bowl, that becomes important. And we need to make sure we have a nice flat shoulder right here. There we go. That should do us. Hang on. There we go. Had a little bit of a roundness in the base of that. We don't want that. We'll go ahead and put this on a chuck. Wood chips everywhere.
That
So
means
we have
progress.
more. I'm sorry.
Wood chips everywhere. That means
Yep,
progress.
that means progress. So we have a lot more control of the way that the bowl is going to be shaped if we start between centers and we can actually swing it around and move our center. And if it does break loose, again, it's still caught. Unless for some reason your tailstock like gave way and just let go, which I pray never happens to anybody. That's a terrifying thought. It won't go anywhere. Okay, if you use the Novichok G3s, if you use the old style anniversary edition, then you know that the jaws have dovetails or have teeth on the dovetail. Do not use those jaws on cross grain tenons, and I will show you what that looks like. And it's only on the 70 mm jaws, and it's only on the old style G3. The new style does not have this feature because of what happens. See that little tooth right there? It's actually
Yes.
a raised ridge. That catches in the cross grain and splits it. Every time I've had a tenon fail on a cross grain bowl, it was using this jaw, and it was because of that feature. The new style Novichok Anniversary Edition G3 does not have that little fang. It's just smooth. So be aware of that. Don't use the old style G3 jaw cross grain. It fails every time. I've never had a successful turn of a cross grain bowl with a tenon with that particular chuck jaw. And this is my old style chuck, but I've got the new jaws on it. Okay. Uh you've got your tenon in, and that's a little bit big, but it'll work. Um you get your tailstock up, lock your tailstock down, bring your bowl in, loosen the jaws, drive that down so that the shoulder of the bowl and the shoulder of the jaw have a good solid connection. The friction caused between the flat surface of the shoulder of the jaw and the flat surface you created when you cut your tenon on the bowl is what gives you the torque to hollow the bowl. And again, this is cross grain, so you don't want to crank it down too hard. It does have more chance of splitting if you do. It should hold fine, but if you crank it down real hard,
You'll crush the side grain and split the end. This side is the end grain. This is the side grain. That'll crush down. That'll split. Whereas if you're doing end grain, you're just crushing all of this together. It makes it stronger. Here, you're going to break it down and make it weaker. So you got to have a nice firm hold on there, but not too hard, or you'll it's counterproductive. It doesn't help. Now, there are multiple schools of where to start cutting when you're hollowing on a normal flat bowl. I'm going to tell you that if you're trying to maintain your live edge, starting from the middle and working your way out almost guarantees you're going to rip the bark off. Start from the edges, and you're going to start at the high points of the edge, and you're going to establish the thickness of your bowl right off. Depending on the bark of the bowl, it tells me how thick, and the size, of course, but it tells me how thick I want to keep the walls. If it's a finer bark, or if I'm doing a natural edge, if I'm working with a piece of very, very lively um, burl, like this brown coolaba, um, I might go very, very thin. For bark that's this rugged, I think that 3/8 of an inch, between the quarter and 3/8 of an inch wall thickness is appropriate so that you can see the ruggedness where it's not as fine as the natural edge here on this burl. You can see the more of the ruggedness is larger. It's not as tight, it's larger. So you want to stay a little bit thicker on the walls. That's my preference. It's a preference. If you like to do it thinner and you don't care so much about seeing the ruggedness of this bark, make them thinner. So we'll start right here and work our way out to that edge. And let me switch you cameras here. And you can see I'm going to move that handle out. And what I want you to see, go back to this camera. Let me move this. Hang on a second here. What I want you to see is this edge. I'm going to aim that edge down the wall. And I lost my thickness a little. We're still over 1/4 of an inch. But that edge is going to tell me the shape of the inside of the bowl. So I've got to swing that right hand way out and cut that down. And then we could start moving that bark and that high edge out of our way. You can see where I changed the center. Here, let me slow that down. See where I changed the center so the hole I originally drilled is off, but the center is still there. So you can see where we changed that when we swung the bowl. We'll get that rough bark out of there,
Oh
and there
no.
she went, because we're doing a demo.
Demoitis. Welcome to the
Now,
club,
notice
brother.
something though. Where was I standing when that happened?
You were out of the line of fire.
I was nowhere near where that bowl went. It went right past me, didn't even brush my arm. That's important. So let's take a look and see what happened. Ah, okay. So that little part right there came up, and this was a very, very thin um, tenon, probably only about 4 mil, maybe 3.
Switch to the overhead.
So that little part knocked loose, and that tenon's probably not thick enough. Here's another cool thing about starting between centers and having something like that happen.
Thank you for touching on that.
If that happens, you started between centers. you still have your centers. I got rid of some of this high stuff, but I still have the center and I still have this center. So to save that, all we have to do is go back between centers. And this is where I really wish I had one of those live centers, those four-prong centers that goes in your jaw. And go back between centers. And I always, if I have that happen, I always go back and look at the tendon and see what happened. Always. Don't just
Yes.
start hacking at it and try to and just if you keep just cutting and cutting and try to hack at it, try to you're just going to keep failing. It's just going to keep failing. That was minor. That was absolutely minor. But go back and look at what happened. So we'll make it a little bit deeper and we will make it a little bit smaller. It was a hair big. So we'll make it a little bit smaller. That's more than enough depth. We'll take a look and make sure so that little inclusion there is pretty deep. However, with enough edge around it, I don't think that's going to have any more impact on us. I think it was just a shallow enough tenon and just a hair too big so that that had that impact. But I don't think that's going to have any more impact on us because we've got 95% nice solid ring of wood here. And that is on the end grain. I think we're going to be okay. Otherwise, we'd end up turning out another eighth to 3/16 of the bowl, and we'd start to lose our shape. We'd have to go right back to reshaping. I think we're safe. So remount it. That's why I always keep that little nub and the center on the bottom when I'm turning bowls. That's why I prefer, for the most part, depending on what I'm making, but most of the time I prefer putting a tenon on the bottom of a bowl for exactly this reason, especially when it's a live edge. Because live edge will give you challenges. So again, we come in, just tighten that loosely. Do not take your hand off of the chuck tool. Drive that
JJ, would
down.
it JJ, would it matter to position that void in between your chuck jaws?
Um, I'd have to find it for okay, so there's a void. Yeah, you can bury it in there, and that probably will make a difference. I think more that tenon was too big. That's see that gap right there? That's
Yeah.
right at
Yeah, it's more in line.
an eighth of an inch. That's going to make sure that we have round contact. That tenon was too
Uh,
big and too shallow. Those were my problems. That just happened to be positioned right where it flaked right out and
right.
probably was where one of the points. If you look at the shape of
Was
your jaw, right, when you get it perfectly round, you have a gap right about that size, and that'll be perfectly round. If you're out of round, if it's too big, these two ends touch, and this doesn't touch the tenon. Just the ends do, and that's where we had. And one of those points happened to be right on that little
yep.
inclusion. And the fact
Yep.
that that was such a shallow tenon as well is
Yeah. So
contributing
so you
factors.
went so you went from having not concentric holding power from the chuck jaws to having 8 points of contact, and then one of
Right.
those points was holding on the void there, and
Yeah.
so in essence you only had 7 points of contact. And um,
Yep.
yep,
And then
yep,
when you're working,
Especially that happened while I was in here towards the center, which is colloquially the slow wood, meaning to go around the circle here is less than the distance to go around the circle here. So mathematically, this wood is moving faster, or more distance is moving around the point at any given time than in here. So it seems like this is moving faster, although radiantly it's moving at the exact same speed than in here. So there's more leverage here on the part of the bowl than there is here. The bowl has mechanical advantage towards the center in the slow wood. I have mechanical advantage out here. Managing that and
Right.
balancing that is tricky. There's more torque working against me in the middle, and that's where it happened. And I think I could safely say that every time I've had that occur, it's been when I was in the middle. That's why we also take small cuts, take small bites. Don't try to hog it out. Take your time.
It's not a
All
race.
right, we're good to go. We're good to go. All right, go back to the hollow cam. So again, we're just kind of removing some of that bumpiness, getting that torque out of the way. Another factor when we have that live edge, when you've got that uneven edge, another factor is the fact here I'm cutting wood, here I'm cutting air, here I'm cutting wood, here I'm cutting air. So that creates a hammering effect on that tenon. So if I've got a tenon that's fairly thin like that one, I'm putting more stress on it. So I definitely want to take lighter cuts while I'm out here turning air so that I don't create that hammering effect as much. It's going to do it no matter what. So again, if we look down from the top, hang on a second. I really hate that Norton, it just popped up in the middle so I can't see. If we look down from the top, this edge, we're going to aim that in the shape of the bowl. Pick up that cut. Again, we're moving a lot of air, so we're getting that hammer. We're going to start bringing that out to that edge, that rim that we already established. And I'm only going about half an inch deep, 3/4 of an inch of my high edge. Make sure that we're not losing bark. We've lost a little bit, but it's not bad. And I'll show you a little trick to bring back some of that character. So we're going to move some more out of the middle. We're starting to get to a place where we need to give our gouge a place to go. I want to keep bulk in the center for as long as I can to prevent the sides from flexing too much, especially with that live edge. Where we do get that hammering effect. We don't want to, we want to keep bulk in there to help prevent that from letting those sides flex, because that's going to flake off the bark even more. We work our way down. A little deeper. We come back. We just take our steps one step lower. If you get too big of a bite, just take a step back. Again, we got a lot of air moving there. Just like that. So I don't know if you've noticed, but I started with my bevel almost flat, like the bottom's going to be. And as I got further out, I rotated that tool more and more so that I ended up with the with that bevel right there in line with the wall of the bowl. We'll take a little bit more out of the center. Again, maintaining as much bulk as we can while giving the gouge a place to go to help prevent flex. As you can see, as I get about 3/4 of the way outbound, I start moving that handle so that I can angle the gouge to trace the bowl. Trace the outside edge of the bowl. Now we're almost down to the low side. So we've got quite a big difference between high side and low side, but I think that looks really cool. And again, it gives the piece direction. This piece will be facing you with the low side in front of you. So we just keep rinse and repeat. And actually, we can move the tool rest in a little bit. That'll help with leverage. Now here in the continuous wood, we can hog a little. We can hog a little bit. We can get some bulk out of there. And again, as we come out further, each step I start with the handle further out, aiming the direction of that gouge so that it traces the outside edge of the bowl. And a little secret, if this kind of cutting makes you nervous because you've got these high and low edges and it's scary, as long as you pay attention to the fact that the knife edge of your hand is behind your tool rest, you'll not get hit. As soon as you start crossing that with the knife edge of your hand, you're in danger. Keep your hand behind your tool rest. That bowl will never hit you. Also, look where my body's positioned. I'm not standing over here horsing on it trying to get it hollow. I'm standing back here working on it, where if it does jump again, it's going to go that way right past me. Body position is very important, as is the position of your tool rest. And always, when you move your tool rest, when you reset your tool rest, always, without fail, turn it by hand. Make sure that it's clear. and that you're not going to turn it on and go skonk and knock the whole wall off. Take a little bit more down in the center. Again, what we're doing here is creating a place for the gouge to go, but we still need to maintain some bulk to prevent wall flex as much as possible. And we're going to have to make a decision about those cracks in a minute. But I want to get to continuous wood all the way around. Let's take a look. We're just about there. Not bad. Not bad. Okay, so we do still have this crack here. Stops about there, so it's not going to be in the bottom of the bowl. That one's almost gone. I don't think I'm going to worry about that. I don't think I need to fill it. I think we're just going to allow that to exist. Again, this wood's pretty dry. I don't think we're going to see that grow much. I think we're just going to just because we're doing a live edge, so it's as rough as can be. I think we're just going to let that crack exist. Don't think it's going to create too much of an issue. I am kind of hogging a little. My puppy is coming in and stealing cutoffs off the floor to take out and chew. A little stinker. All right. I believe we have a continuous circle. We are below that lip. We need to come back a little tiny bit, but we're just about there. So from above, you can see what I'm talking about with the bowl having direction. You're looking straight down, and that back end is definitely higher than the front. Again, I find that is, to me, that's an extremely expressive. So we've got a little discussion about tool. This is an Irish or a James or uh, Ellsworth style grind. Um, this is a 40/40 with the heel cut off. It will probably do about the same in this bowl. Both are 5/8 inch. I find that the Ellsworth grind is just more versatile. I just have a lot more options with the gouge. Oh, but I also have this, not that. This. This is traditional English 60/60 or 60-degree grind, fingernail. Just literally 60 degrees. Goes straight into the sharpening system and you rotate it like that to sharpen it. This is my bottom feeder. So out here on the walls, I have to get way out there. And the further your gouge is away from your body on the walls to get that bevel near the wood, I've got to swing my right arm all the way, fully extended. Even if I'm standing up against the lathe, my right arm is way, way, way out here. With the Ellsworth, once I get that picked up, what I do is rotate the gouge open to about 45 degrees. And as I travel around, I open the flute. So by the time I'm in the bottom of the bowl, this is 60 degrees as well. It's the same angle as the fingernail grind. They're both 60 degrees. By the time I'm in the bottom of the bowl, I'm riding that 60-degree bevel with the Ellsworth the exact same way as I'm riding it with the English grind, which is almost wide open. So I go from being able to pick up the cut with a very, very steep angle to a nice, smooth, bottom feeding style angle and it in a very, very smooth transition. Whereas here, I've got to work like this because I can rotate those wings. Although I start like this, as soon as I start closing it, I can bring that closer and get my elbow in against my body and lock it and support that cut. I, to me, this is a much more controllable and more versatile grind even than the 40/40. In fact, I'm probably going to ungrind that 40/40 and put an Ellsworth on it. But sorry for the zoom. That's as far in as it'll go. But as you see, when I pick up the cut, I'm at 45 degree, or I'm probably 70 degrees. I open to about 45, and as I travel towards the center, just like I'm revving a motorcycle, I'm opening that flute so that by the time I get to the center, I'm at just about the same openness as with that 60-degree bottom feeder. Just about straight up and down, just a tiny bit off of it. So one gouge does all of the things, including that shear scrape with the closed flute. And I don't have to change tools. So even though I am having to start out here, I'm able, as I rotate that, it allows me to change the angle of the handle so that I get the tool back to my body and maintain control quicker. As soon as my elbow touches my body, I've got 3 points of contact. I've got a brace on my left hip, a brace on my or left rib, brace on my right rib, and a brace on the tool rest. I've got 3 points of contact, and that gives me a fairly stable cut, even though my right hand is far away from my body. Too deep. All right, now we do have to deal with the bottom of the bowl. We need to check our depth.
You can see we still got bark here, and we've got just about 2 inches here. Let's see, inch and a half. Our wall thickness is just under half an inch, about 3/8, and it's getting thicker as we come down. So we need to come back up here and bring that down a little bit more to bring this edge even with this edge. That's just a matter of making this cut a little bit steeper here. And then we really need to turn the corner when this part here, this cut right here, gets even with the outside bottom of the bark. That's when we need to turn the corner and turn the bottom of the bowl. So we're just about there. My gouge is hanging on by a thread. So we'll come back here, pick that cut up, rub the bevel, back up. As soon as you start seeing chips fly, open it. We're still cutting a lot of air up here, but we're making that wall thinner, which is going to thin out the bottom edge. That's much better. So it's right here is the cut, and that's much more even. It's still going to end up getting a little bit, tiny bit thicker as we turn that corner, but that's a little bit more even. So we have time to adjust before we get into the bottom of the bowl, but once we do turn that corner, those adjustments are going to get a little more difficult. So we need to make a little bit more room for the gouge to go. Come back, pick that cut up. Let's take a look. A lot of start and stop right this stage. Just, just about there. And something you can do if you feel comfortable doing it is you can shear scrape on that inside wall even though you're turning air. And this is about a trick that you can use is lock your hand right here and use it like a pool cue, sliding it through your hand. And that allows you to maintain some stability. Rather than moving both your hands back and forth, that'll give you a little bit more stability. That actually got us about where we need to be. So now we're going to work through the bottom of the bowl. This is a tricky part, but not as difficult as it could be.
Do you need to go sharpen?
Sorry? Yeah,
Do you need to
let
go
me do that.
sharpen?
I definitely need
Okay.
to sharpen.
Yep.
This
Yeah, I
gouge
was picking
is
up on
hanging
that.
on by its teeth, by the skin of its teeth.
Look at that gorgeous barrel of miscellaneous parts.
Uh-huh. Right? Yeah, I noticed that myself.
What was that?
You got that barrel of miscellaneous parts, as Mr. Duxbury calls it.
Oh yes, the bucket
Nice,
o cutoffs.
nice piece of
Oh, that one back there
Yes,
Yeah.
also cut.
the
Yeah,
barrel.
that's every single kind of species you can think of, cutoffs, failed projects, and every week or so, at least one piece comes out and ends up being a part of something. I don't throw. There's no such thing as scrap wood. Just wood I haven't turned yet. Okay. Well, now at this point, we're dealing with basically a standard bowl blank. I don't have any weird edges. I've just got a nice even. So here we can do it, the traditional way. Start in the middle and work your way out down here.
where we couldn't really do that when we're turning all that air. And again, as you see, as I get closer to the center, that gouge just gets more and more open. As soon as I can get that elbow in against my body, I do. And I don't have a curved rest that fits this lathe, but this is a good place for a curved rest if you have one. All right, now, very quickly, let's do a little bit of a depth check. Oh, we've got plenty of room here. Now okay, here's something that I like about the Ellsworth grind. I don't know if you noticed that. It was pretty subtle. Here, coming around the corner, I've got my arm way out here, right? Because I've got to come around this corner. But as soon as I get that corner turned, I can reset, open that gouge almost fully, and come across here. And what did I do when I reset? I brought my arms in, locked them down so that I've got a much more solid base to hold that. Let me show you what that looks like. So we'll pick up the cut, open about 45 degrees, turn the corner, and then I can come back. I'm still cutting on the same edge, but because of that 60 degrees, I can come right across the bottom here with the bowl locked in to my body and a much more stable hold, even though I'm way off the end of the fulcrum of my lever. So just come around like that, and then come back and pick it up. And that just gives me a little tiny bit more control, but I'm still hanging way off the edge of the tool rest. So I have to be real careful here. Take a look at our depth again. One thing I like about a live edge bowl like this is you can feel the corner. You just stick your fingers right in and feel your thickness, feel your consistency from top to bottom and get all the way to the bottom of the bowl. And we're fairly good. We still need to remove more down here in the corner. Almost. You can see where I need to pick the cut up. Can you see that? I'm not sure if you can see that. There's a line right here. So you should be able to see where I can pick the cut up. Can you see that little ridge? Not sure if you can. Here, I'll show you. There's a little ridge right here where I need to pick the cut up.
Yeah, we can see it.
Yeah. And that's another trick you can, especially when you've got high and low, and is draw it. That way, as you're turning, if it disappears, you know you got it. All right. Now we need a little bit of refinement. A scraper will do most of that. Still have a bit of a hump right here. One thing that does tend to happen with this type of bowl is that you end up with a flat bottom or a flattish bottom where you don't have a continuous curve going through the bowl. Um, you end up with a bit of a flat bottom. And that's kind of the nature of the way that these turn out. You can certainly turn it where that doesn't happen, but it just seems to be a tendency. And maybe it's just me, but it seems to be a general tendency that that bottom usually ends up being fairly flat. They make really good bowls for your uh, mixed nuts during the holidays. You put your walnuts and your hazelnuts in there. They look really good in that live edge. So from here, we're gonna get the scraper and just clean that bottom up real quick. Sorry, I have to walk around my cabinet with my computer to get to my tools. Shop redesign, I didn't consider that. There's going to be another redesign. This is Babs. And if you do scrape in the bottom, scrape in the bottom. Don't try to come up the walls with a bowl scraper because as soon as it starts to come loose here and it starts whacking on that, you're going to lose your bark. It's going to go flying. Just a word of caution. Now, I told you I'd show you a method of fixing this little problem where we lost a couple of chips of bark. This is one way to do it. I do have 2 fire extinguishers within quick reach. But a way to disguise the fact that you lost a little bit of bark is darken up what stayed. There we go. And a little attention with a brush. And you almost can't tell that that bark came off. All righty. Any questions?
You've been extremely thorough thus far.
Absolutely great.
Let me show you. There's the front. So here's the bottom. That's flat. So here you have with the low side and the high side, you
Yep.
have a front and a back to your bowl. So it's a kind of a neat way. It gives a presentation there. And that's just, it's up to you. You can when you start between centers and swing this center around, you can change that balance completely. That is entirely up to you.
Hey, JJ, to address the cracks. So
Yes.
thankfully your bowl stayed together, didn't come apart, but uh, why do you think that it held together instead of coming apart?
Because it's very dry. This is not green wood.
Okay.
This is pretty dry, so that's not moving. That bowl didn't move while I turned it. This is a lot drier than I thought it was. If this had been greener wood, we would have been spending some time with some CA glue and filling those cracks. But with this being as dry as it is, uh, if anything, as it absorbs moisture, those cracks are probably going to close.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Now, that's not to say that there's not a place for filling the cracks. I just decided in this case with this bowl, I wasn't going to. And that's always case by case for me. Any other questions?
How will you finish the bottom?
Ah, very good. Okay. Let's do that real quick. Just a second. Where's my bucket o' cutoffs?
Got a whole barrel of them.
There we go. So I do have buckets o' cutoffs. And for a bowl this small, this is probably this is what I'll use. And I use shelf liners. I use dollar store shelf liner to create a bit of a buffer here. Now, obviously, we would have sanded the outside, sanded the inside. We'd be to that stage. Bring the tailstock back up. Another reason why I like to start between centers and why I try to always keep that little nub with that center is to finish the bottom. Just a second. Let me grab my shelf liner. And this stuff, I buy it at the dollar store for $1. It's cheap. So I cut it, I tear it, whatever I need to get the shape I need. It's so inexpensive and so easily and readily available. I don't worry about trying to make precise shapes and sizes. I just tear off what I need because the Dollar General is 3 minutes in that direction. So your little rounded, some kind of a friction block, your shelf liner that protects the inside of your bowl and also gives you some friction. Bring in your tailstock, lock it down, spin by hand. And one way you can do this that works really well is bring your tool rest in. And just stick your fingernail right here. And you can see where you're touching your fingernail. You want that to be consistent.
That ain't much of a
All right.
fingernail.
No, but there's enough there. But we're just about perfect. We're just about perfect, okay? I say use your fingernail because that's a sharp corner. If you just use your finger, you're going to cut yourself, unless you have sandpaper for hands like I do. So, with the exception of our little bad spot there, we're consistent. Not bad. It's maybe a hair off, but we'll clean that up. We can clean that up, make sure that's nice and tight. Just do a little quick shear scrape here. Make sure that bottom edge is nice and even. And you want to make sure that you're concave. Whoops. Good old Laguna tool rest. You want to make sure that it's concave, that the center is lower or is higher than the edges so that it rests on the rim. Now, if you take your gouge and go like this, you're cutting down across the end grain as it comes around, and it gets you a nice, clean cut, and it removes material very rapidly. So at this point, we'd sand all of this, make sure that it's all exactly where we want it to be. A little bit more right here. And then we're going to come back with that Mark Soleil style 3/8 inch spindle gouge. We're going to start whittling away. At that center. Now, at this point, you can do so many different things to get this out. Phil Anderson and the Papa 1947, Gary, I can't remember Gary's last name. Um, what they like to do is put pressure against the heel of the gouge, ride that in, and cut, holding the bowl against that surface while you're cutting, so that you're actually holding that bowl with the heel of your gouge and your hand on the stop switch. However, this is cross grain. I find it to be a little bit safer and a little bit quicker to just knock that little sucker off. Usually it'll come right off. I might need to turn it a little bit thinner. This is pretty
Easier
dense
said
grain
than
wood.
done.
Yeah, well, this is really dense grain wood. Maple, actually, that probably would have snapped right off even at that thickness, but this stuff is pretty dense. I don't know if it's harder on the Janka scale, but it's very dense.
Yeah, it's only about
Gary,
900 on the Yonka scale.
So we'll turn that just a little bit thinner. But again, it's safer if the lathe is not turning. It's just safer. If you can do this without the lathe turning, you have, there you go. And then you just do a little bit of chisel work and a little bit of sanding, and that comes right nice and even, and you never even
Uh,
knew how you were holding the bowl.
Hey, JJ, when you
Yes.
go to snap it off like that, would you do it towards the side grain or would you do it towards the end grain?
Side grain. So the grain's running
Yes,
this way, and I just popped it straight over.
right. Okay, very good.
Yep.
Because
Gary
otherwise
Asher.
you'll pull up
I'm
those splitters.
I'm sorry.
Says
Gary
Gary
Asher
Asher.
for
Papa
Papa
1947, Gary
1947
Asher.
Gary Asher. Okay. I can never remember his last name. I just know his name's Gary.
from Ireland.
Okay.
So we
Any
have
other
a question.
questions?
So we have a question. What would you finish? What kind of finish would you put on that?
This one, I would probably use Brad's Workbench Tongue Honey. I'd finish it off the lathe. That's pure tongue oil, beeswax, and carnauba wax in a oil-heavy mixture. So the lathe, you don't have to buff it in with the lathe turning. The tongue wax is wax heavy, and you have to buff it with the lathe turning. Well, once you get the bottom finished, you can't keep it turning. Um, so I would finish it with that, and then usually hand buff with Quad Zero, 3M Quad Zero, the white 3M pads. You just buff it by hand, and it gives it a really nice, very very rich satin luster,
Okay,
and
very
it's
good.
food safe.
And
The other way
then
you can go
I'm
is
sure,
Parfix 3408, which you can also do off the lathe.
right. And then I'm sure there's questions about it. Nobody's asked it, but I'm going to go ahead and put it out there, even though I know what it is. Can you show the Mark Soleil grind on the spindle gouge
Oh, sure.
for those that aren't familiar with it?
So it's grubby. Um, First thing you do is you give it a uh, you change the you change this shape to the
Parabolic curve.
thank you, Mark. I knew you were there. Parabolic curve, and then you want to take, and this one's actually cut fairly steep for hollowing, but then you're going to take and make the back convex and take all the heel off and everything. So the actual working part of the gouge is about a 1/16 of an inch right around here, just enough with my short little fingernails. I can just get it under my fingernail. That's what does the work. This is just out of the way.
Very good.
And I have one that Mark sharpened. Um, well,
Excuse me,
I've worked
JJ.
on it.
Excuse me.
Yes.
Um, no, is there when you make that grind on the sides? Are you looking
Uh-huh.
for anything kind of what kind of a degree?
Steep. Marks are even more radical. I haven't I don't have enough guts to sharpen it as to sharpen it and thin it as radically as Mark does. Mark will show you one of his. It's steep. There's no it's done by hand. There's no mathematical equation. You cut it steep, you sharpen it steep.
Yep, just do it.
That's three,
I
Brenda.
love
That's a 3M pad. That's quad zero or 3M buffing pad, non-abrasive. And the really cheap way to get it is go to the floor cleaning section at Lowe's or Home Depot, and you can buy a 2 foot or 3 foot white buffing pad that goes on the floor buffer for about $6 or $7 and just cut it into squares yourself. You don't have to buy it packaged like this. And that's the non-abrasive 3/8. Yeah, 3M.
So, do we have any other questions?
Any other questions?
You did a pretty good job, Joaquin.
Thank you, sir. Coming from you, that's a huge compliment.
Thank you, JJ. Good job.
Well, with that, JJ, on behalf of
I
myself.
had a very enjoyable evening for sure.
All right, so with that, not only on myself but the rest of worldwide, we really appreciate you doing this demo, JJ. You did a fantastic job. Um, I think the key moment for me, and I'm sure for a lot of other folks within the group, was when the the tenon was made a little oversized and it popped off, and you were able to come back, explain what happened with the tenon, explain the void, um, re-verify the how if it's made properly, you've got a full concentric chucking point of your chuck. When it's oversized, you're only hitting on the 8 points, and then because one of those points was on that void, you're only on there for 7, and that's the reason why it popped off and you created birdwood.
Conversely,
That was the key moment.
Conversely, if you make the tenon too small, you go from 8 points to 4, and it only
Correct.
hits in the it only hits in
It only hits
the
in the crown, in the crown of it.
crown, and
Right.
that's even worse. If the
Yes.
tenon's too small, you're in a worse situation.
Correct. Correct.
Yeah, you're begging for it to come off the lathe.
Absolutely.
Right. Yeah, for sure. And that's something that
Don't ask me how I know.
I don't think we've ever, and I don't think we've ever talked about that in the past. We talk about, the correct size. We talk
Well,
about being
I'm glad I could
oversized.
demonstrate it then.
So I think that was the key learning point out of, outside everything else that you taught. I think that was the moment that I think that a lot of people would have generated some value out of it, especially for new turners, experiencing birdwood.